What is up, all you cool cats and kittens? This is your Commissioner Tim with our very first installment of our weekly power rankings for the members in our league. So I'm going to start off with our first one at week 3 power rankings, and we'll start off by looking at our standings first. After 2 weeks, we got one undefeated team in Ben Campo, and we got one winless team in John Gallagher. So it's obviously, as we're looking to develop a power ranking for the season, standings itself is important because obviously, like I mentioned in yesterday's video, in the case of Ben, a 2-0 start in a 14-game season, where that means we only have 12 more games remaining until our playoff berth is all decided. That 2-0 start is actually very substantial in terms of giving you the probability to get into the playoffs. And as we all know, anything happens in playoffs, given that there's 1 week, a single injury or anything can happen. So really the playoff berth probability, I think, is the most important in the ability to be able to think about whether you have a chance to win the playoffs or not. But I think another stat that I really like to look for is points for. Obviously, we're in 2 weeks, so it's not necessarily enough of a sample size to really tell a difference. But obviously, over the course of a long season, I believe the points for category, and when it comes to sort of like the basic KPIs that we can look at, I think it's always a good indicator, at least like decent indicator, that tells you the strength of the rosters in each week. So obviously, again, a lot of disclaimers for week 2 points for, and this is not going to be the rankings of my power rankings as you'll see in the next slide. But points for is always a good indicator. Obviously, the disclaimer here is we haven't had bye weeks, so it doesn't show you the strength of the depth of the bench on the roster. What all those things we're going to be factoring into creating wins and losses throughout the regular season. So at the top, we have Tiche, me, trust the process, having outscored everyone through 2 weeks at 325 points. And the bottom, we have Chota at 247 points. So I wanted to mention something here where obviously, again, it's early, but there is a grouping where the top sort of 4, maybe including Ben, and then there's a significant, about a 29-point drop from the top 5 to where Bill's Mafia sits as the 6th highest scoring output leader of the league today. And then we have Full Chubb, which you mentioned is having a lot of issues to start off the season, especially with the quarterback play. And then Chota is at the lowest, but I wouldn't consider too much of that, especially given the first week he was running with 2 quarterbacks, and he's made the trades now to be able to get into contention mode. So we should see a lot of these numbers changing. But that said, records are records, and standings are standings. So I wanted to take into consideration of how we're looking at the power rankings. Keep in mind, this is how I would view as the ranking of the probability to win the championship this year. So obviously standings pre all bye weeks are factored in, taken into consideration the points for, along with how I'm looking at the roster across the board. So starting off with 8, I have Full Chubb, obviously the only team that is winless, also towards the bottom of the league, as mentioned in the previous slide in terms of points for. So shaky start to start the season at the quarterback play, but plenty of power in his roster to definitely make a playoff run, like what Commissioner Brandon mentioned in last week's video. I currently have our playoff cut line estimation at 7-7, so that means that John has to go 7-5 to finish the season, and I think his roster is more than capable of being able to do that. And certainly, we still have a lot of games left in the season. So until his team starts to actually produce wins, or at the very least put up more points than being one of the worst in the league, I have to leave John and Full Chubb at 8. The last salt I'll rub on Full Chubb, even though he's been shit on enough, even though that he's sitting at 0-2, right, is that he has also had one of the easiest opponents in terms of points against, and he's still sitting at 0-2. All right, enough shit talking about the worst team in our roster, in our league so far. That takes me to 7, where I have Chota. Chota got his ugly win in week 2 with that Lamar Jackson front flip touchdown, but he's also currently the lowest scoring output of our league. I've got Chota higher than Full Chubb only because of his addition of Lamar Jackson and Darren Waller. Obviously, he's strengthened up, and we saw that result show up already in week 2. This team's obviously dealing with a lot of injuries right now, especially with Jarvis Landry out, and obviously Michael Thomas is out at least until probably week 7. But I do expect Chota to sneak into the top half of the league sometime in the season, especially as he starts to get an output from a healthier and healthy Saquon, as he's going to be continue to progress, and Michael Thomas whenever he does come back from IR. All right, so at 6, I have Bills Mafia. Ooh, I think Brandon's going to be upset to see where I have him ranked, but I think he'll understand, given the concerns of his team to start out this season. He's put up the 3rd least amount of points on points for through 2 weeks, but so far through these 2 weeks, Josh Allen, Dak Prescott, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, A.J. Brown, they are all concerns so far. So that represents sort of the low output on the points for that Brandon's had for the first 2 weeks, and at sitting at 1-1, especially against a decent sort of, average sort of strength of schedule for the first 2 weeks in terms of points against. Unfortunately, I do have to have Bills Mafia after week 2, so week 3 power rankings at 6. However, I do completely believe that this team is a team with a lot of firepower. And I think this is going to be the lowest point that we have Bills Mafia in the power rankings for the rest of the season. All right, so at 5, I don't think I'm biased. I think this is a good sitting spot for me. I would not rank myself any higher, even though I have the highest points for. I have my team trusted process here sitting at 5. Obviously, again, the highest current leader in points for through 2 weeks, so that counts for something, and that really was the reason I would put myself ahead of Bills Mafia, even though obviously Bills Mafia I completely believe has a better roster than I do. But a lot of players have been traded away for prospects on my roster, and the likely for a lot of young likely studs who still have yet to prove it though. So far, the downgrading at my tight end position while accruing picks, going from Kelsey to Waller to Gronk, right, through those sort of 2 separate trades, has paid off pretty well in being able to accrue picks. But will Gronk's output continue to last, or will my team be the story of too many trades for my own good? So I think right now my team is too thin for it to be a contender for a playoff berth this season. But again, who knows? We're playing 14 more games. All it's going to take is probably going 7-7. And anything can happen once you get past the playoff berth. So we shall see. At 4, this is where it gets really interesting. I have our single one undefeated team here in Ben. I really do think you can put Ben, Trust the Process, and Bills Mafia in their own little tier right now. That said, I still have Ben ranked at the highest of that group, given his record. And how big of a difference starting out 2-0 makes, again, to the playoff berth probability when you only have 12 more games to play. So the knocks on Ben, though, for his 2-0 is that he has faced the second easiest schedule to date to get his 2-0. But hey, a win's a win and records are records, and those are going to factor in the same when you get into the playoff berth decision. So I do have Ben sitting at 4 here. Now, this next tier is what I would like to call the playoff berth favorites. So I do have all remaining 3 teams as the favorites to make playoffs in this season. That means that the 4th position is what I believe will be fought out at the 7-7 mark with all the bottom 5 teams that I've mentioned here, who are all very much still in play. Everyone's got a narrative to be able to make that, I think, 4th playoff seeding. So starting out with 3, I have Adam, whose team showed me that he's got plenty of firepower on a good week, scoring 175 points when you've got Alvin Kamara only giving you 5 points and your flex producing 2.2 points. I mean, as was the case of Antonio Brown last week in week 2. I think Adam's ceiling per week is as high as anyone else's in this season, as we've seen in week 2 output. But at 2, I have Cup to Canada. Maybe it was a recency bias of getting my ass handed to me by Cup to Canada in week 2. But the reason I have it ranked so high, even after a disappointing week 1, and ongoing concerns that continued with him into week 2, is I think there's only one real hole that I see on his roster right now, and it's crab leg Jameis being QB2, right? Tuga Tagovailoa, if I pronounced that right, is looking like he's taken he's not looking like he's taken that step this year, but if Yeeves is able to fix his QB2 without hurting his depth too much, I think it gets next to impossible to beat his team. But the work involved in finding a solid, reliable QB2 in our league without giving up too much pieces that's going to affect his depth and his starter play seems like a bigger challenge ahead for Yeeves than what I think this next team I'll mention needs to do for the rest of the season. So at 1, I have Ryan Lenigen. Coming into the season, I think there were only 2 holes in his roster, which was the question mark around his quarterback play, with Russell Wilson being QB1 and Tom Brady being QB2, as well as the question mark surrounding Antonio Gibson. Right? He was promised all these touches, he was promised all this action, almost like a Christian McCaffrey type of action and workload play for that Washington football team. We have yet to see it through 2 weeks. If anything, we've seen some potential concerning signs around Antonio Gibson. But, so I don't have any questions, though, on his quarterbacks through 2 weeks. This looks like it could be a potential career year for Tom Brady in terms of at least touchdowns provided. He seems like he's just commanding the offense there, and he's got way too many weapons. He's fresh. The entire squad is full of all the starters that are returning back from the Super Bowl win last year. But if Antonio Gibson is able to take that next step, again, he's struggled for the first 2 weeks. If he can make that next step, I think it'll be hard to put my money on someone else other than Ryan winning the championship this year. And as the 2 final points on why I have Ryan ranked higher is specifically because I believe that all Ryan has to do is wait and see if Antonio Gibson can become that value of that 2nd round pick or that 3rd round pick that he took Antonio Gibson with. Seems like a much easier work for the manager compared to what Yeeves has to do in being able to flip pieces around and make something work to get a QB2 back, especially when he's already traded away his 1st round for this year and next year. So, all right, that does it for our power rankings heading into week 3. Look forward to the video coming out by Commissioner Brandon tomorrow for the weekly previews. Again, as a reminder, he's sitting at 4-4 after going a hot 3-1 in week 2. Have a good rest of your day. Looking forward to seeing you on Thursday, Sunday, and Monday. Peace.